Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the online world of learning and the Kyrgyzstan KG Tesol wonderful conference, the day two, for the second half of day two. My name is Miriam Oppenheimer from the online world of learning, and I'm happy to present our second speaker, technically, of the day. And her name is Dr. K M Reynolds from the Central Washington University in the United States. She is a professor of TESOL. She worked for many years as a director in Virginia. She worked in Qatar and she worked in Wisconsin for 14 years. As you can see, the name of her presentation, because you know how to read. I'd like to also bring to everyone's attention the interesting and cross multidisciplinary aspect of her work. We were talking yesterday about multidisciplinary work or cross-disciplinary work. Is she has written a book about being an ally to LGBTQ people, and that's about to be published on the combination of those two, is TESOL and how to be an ally. And this is I think this is her third book that she has written. So we are very, very happy and proud to welcome you to our conference. And thanks so much for being here. It's really great and wonderful to have such a great diversity of people at our conference. So thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, for me, it is good morning. What time is it for all of you? Is it early or is it afternoon?
Everybody's different.
Everybody's different. Okay. Well, good morning, good evening, and good night. So it is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for a warm welcome. So today I'm going to talk about the keys to preparation, strategies for exploring topics, and pre-writing. This has come out of some of my instructional work with undergraduates and graduates in Washington State, because we're trying to increase literacy within the state. We want to make sure that the students are coming out of high school with pretty strong writing skills going into college. And right now it's kind of a bleak time because in terms of teaching writing, because many of the students aren't reading as much as they used to, right? So the numbers of readers have really fallen. They might be watching TikTok videos, but they're not picking up a book, or they might be reading a short little article, but they're not reading a longer piece or something that involves a lot of depth. So with that in mind, it becomes even more critical to try to make that bridge between reading and writing, and get students into writing in a way that's scaffolded and approachable for them. So I am very happy to be here. One thing I want to mention, I will have an image of my book at the end. Some of the stuff comes from this book. I don't think you can see it right now. I hate when the screens cover it in the back. So I'll have a picture of it at the end. So, and if you have any questions, please ask when you're ready. You might be wondering to yourself why I have a field being plowed here. And really, the plowing in the field makes the plant a good harvest. If you don't plow it well, there will be all kinds of weeds and other things in the soil, so that the seeds will constantly be fighting and in competition with the seeds will be in competition in terms of growth with grass or other things coming up in the field. So it's really important to be focusing on the preparation soil in order to yield a harvest. And that's the same kind of pattern that we see when it comes to teaching writing, because it can be a very difficult process if a student doesn't go through some developmental stages to get there. So Alexander Graham Bell said, before anything else, preparation is the key to success. And I have to say this because, I held up my book earlier, and I honestly would not be able to do this sort of writing if I hadn't been taught these different techniques and been teaching them for years and years and years. And now I've gotten writing down to almost a science for myself. I still have to turn in some TESOL proposals for next year in Tampa. That's due June 1st. So I'm putting the word out there for you. Please put in your proposals for next year at TESOL, June 1st, 5 p.m. Eastern time. So I have to get that writing done. So you'll see here in this image, this is just a very simple kind of mind map with information about birds migrating. So when we're talking about any sort of literacy moment, the reading and the writing are completely intertwined, right? And we want to make sure that students have a way to lay out what they're learning, to be able to visualize it. Because if it's all locked in your head and then you just start trying to put things down in order, there will be a very it will be a more difficult and clunky approach to writing. So my daughter's always laughing at me because she is doing all these college essays to go to college next year. And the first question I ask her is, what is the prompt? And the next question I ask her is, have you done your pre-writing? she gets it from my husband and I. He's an English professor as well. So I learned about the process approach to writing when I was a fresh person, a first year at university. And for anybody who might not know, and I know this is a big review for a lot of people, but if anybody's not familiar with it, it's where you're going to be doing a plan at the beginning and you're going to discuss that plan with your students. Give them an outline so they know what's coming up, like an advanced organizer, and they know what the dates are, even if you have something written on the board where the dates are listed and what they will be doing for what period of time. It includes rubrics, though, too. And this is something that years ago, I started trying to make sure all of my rubrics came out the minute the prompt came out. So I could tell them really what I was looking for. So that's a big part that we're not going to get into today, but that is a big part of laying it out for our students. I have found with my students, whether they're in second grade and they're writing about mammals, or they're in 5th grade and they're writing about a mystery, or if they're in 10th or 12th grade and writing about, their approach to solving a world problem. Whatever that topic is, we need to help them identify and discuss an authentic audience. So for me, an authentic audience is if I can find a real audience for my students, I do that. For example, I might have them write a letter to the editor of newspaper, trying to give them that real audience. So they don't necessarily have to mail these things, but they do need to identify that the audience is other than the teacher, because if they perceive that the audience is the teacher, there's a lot of things that they know, and they don't want to rephrase that, right? So the next part, and often in a traditional approach to a writing, it's the brainstorming topics. And that can mean making lists or taking notes or talking to others or observing. We're going to talk about some of these different approaches in a bit. Learning more and finding more sources comes in. So we might do a visit to what the research literature shows at different processes. At different times. We might revisit the research literature. We might look for some sort of support, because we want our learners to be able to bring in other readings about the topic. Outlining it with a cognitive map, something like that, as you saw with the migrating birds. And noting those connections between ideas is really important. Recently, I did some work with Deborah Suarez and Andy Curtis on leadership in English language teaching. And we used a technology called Miro. And I will put that in the chat box so you all can take a look. I think our organizers would probably appreciate if you would not use it until after the talks and after the conference. So it's called Miro, and it's a big spreadsheet. And you can type things on and move things around. It's very easy. So to kind of create that mind map, if you really wanted to go technological. One of the nice things is you can draw lines between ideas on that. And again, we find more sources. We prepare our first draft, and usually that's the hardest part for the student, is getting things down. And I like to ask students to write chunks at a time because it's more manageable. It scaffolds for them. And then hopefully the student will read their draft critically. Often I ask them to just read it out loud to themselves, whisper read it to themselves. They'll revise, they will proofread for errors at some point if they can find them. And that helps with that self-monitor, crash and self-monitor. We want them to be able to monitor their own production and find their own issues within their language. Whenever they can do that, they are going to be able to strengthen their language, their reading, their writing, and their speaking and listening on their own. Finally, receiving feedback, formal feedback about their writing. I don't send anything out without my husband reading it. So I finished an article this past week and it went right to my husband. Thank goodness he's an English professor. And then preparing the second draft, and then the evaluation of the writing by a teacher or a peer at the end. So you might be saying, oh, this is old news, but I think we're going to now start getting into more interesting new information. So the biggest instructional strategy that I have been enjoying using recently is to model the writing task by using a mentor text. And a mentor text is basically a text of any kind. It can be short, it can be longer. They should be relatively easy to read. So maybe slightly underneath the comprehensibility of the learner. So a little bit easier for them to read so that they can see the patterns within it. And you are going to engage in direct instruction on the specific form within writing. So you might have them read a mentor text on a topic like a newspaper article if they're going to be writing a newspaper article. You can have them engage in discussion with the mentor text by asking questions about it, not just comprehension questions, right? So like, who is Clara Barton and why is she an important person that we need to learn about? Next is analyzing mentor texts, genre features, the text structures, and the language and signal words. So that's a really big one. So let's get into that. So every mentor text is going to be written in some sort of genre, whether it's an expository text, a description, whether it's some sort of narrative, whether it's argumentative. And to analyze those genre features, how is that set up? What are the text structures in that, and how is it organized? Will really help your students understand what they need to do. So it's modeling for them with a mentor text. I sat in on a presentation with Maria Estella Brisk, and I just love her systemic functional linguistics. She talks a lot about the fact that if we're not using something like a mentor text and showing how texts are put together, we're just asking students to write. We're not really teaching them to write, right? So it's definitely throwing them in the deep end. One of the things I've been working a lot recently is with specific language and signal words that go along with text structures. So, for example, in a narrative, you're going to hear things like once upon a time, or next, then finally, that sort of thing, to show movement within a narrative, versus and two, or better than. So you're going to see phrases that are academic content phrases and signal words. So there's a video. I'm not going to play it, but you can watch it later because I'll share my slides. Everything's written on them. But I want to show you something that everybody these days is up in arms about. Everybody's so concerned about using ChatGPT, students using ChatGPT. And I don't know how many of you have engaged. I'm sure some of you have engaged with using ChatGPT. I actually just like to play with the art one. But my husband and I have been dabbling in it to get a sense of what it can do, what its limitations are, and basically it lies a lot. So, and it doesn't cite its sources; it makes up sources and things. So, this is one way you can always protect yourself. You can say the essay you write has to have 5 unique sources that I can find online if I check them. So, anyway, I asked it to write a 5-paragraph essay in third person. This is my prompt on the side for a comparison essay about the outsiders, book ninth graders read, between the book and a movie. I wanted a comparison essay between the book and the movie. And so you can see this is what it wrote. It actually wrote a pretty good essay. And I highlighted in yellow some of the key features of this, the first part, the introduction. It makes sure that the title and the author are front and center, whether it's the first thing that it talks about, or whether it's a little bit later in that sentence. Right away, it situates the topic, and it sets up for this idea of the teenage struggles and social divisions of the time, right? Because we know that's going to come up later. It has the the thesis down at the bottom. This essay claims to explore and compare these aspects. And then clear topic sentences in the paragraph 1 under character development, the book version of blah, blah, blah. And then finally, with green, you're seeing things like how it's developing off of the topic sentence. This is a very standard essay. This is, for me, how you can use ChatGPT. Before this came out, finding exemplar texts or mentor texts was really challenging. Sometimes we write them ourselves, right? I know I wrote a lot of them. And I would say, well, this is how it's set up, and this is how you do this, and this is how you do that. But to have them see a prompt similar to what you're working on, and they see it in action, how it's writing it, and how it's linking different sentences together, and you analyze it, they get a better sense of how to go about the writing process. So the most difficult and complicated part of the writing process, according to Yehoza, I think that's how you pronounce it, is the beginning. It really is that beginning of that journey. And a lot of our students, they dread this, right? This is painful. They would rather do anything else in the world, which just kind of bothers me, because it's not that bad. And it's actually quite a personal sort of thing. And if we give them tools, that beginning won't be so daunting. It won't look like such a tedious job. So some other instructional strategies I have that I'm going to talk about are about idea generation and gathering. Students often have a really hard time determining what the topic is, and gathering information and sorting and organizing information. So these are some of the pre-writing strategies. You may have noticed in the previous sentence or previous slide, some of them you might not even know what those are, but we're gonna go through those. We want to organize, whether we're asking students to just jot down and make a list, brainstorming. And I put individual there because recently I was listening to a book talk on National Public Radio here in the United States, and the author is a CEO of an organization. And she said, in terms of creativity, if you ask 3 or 4 people to sit down and generate new ideas, they will censor themselves. They will prevent ideas from coming to the table because they'll be embarrassed or intimidated by the process, and that they need to feel like things are correct before they share them. Whereas with brainstorming, we know that it should not be what is correct. It should be whatever comes to our minds, right? We can eliminate things later. So the author recommended that we engage in individual brainstorming, coming up with a list and then bringing it to the group if you're going to do a group project. Clustering, you can see the image in the third one at the bottom, clustering, putting things in connected spheres. Cubing is one of the pre-writing strategies I like a lot. Imagine a cube with the topic inside of it. And the top face would be some sort of association with that topic. The bottom face is an argument for or against it. The front face is description. And then the left face is comparison. The right face is analyze it. And the back face is apply it. So students really enjoy this sort of thing because it's very 3-dimensional. So you could have them print out, and there are die online that you can download and fold and have them write, these areas on their cube and then go about completing that cube. And so it's a physical and an intellectual part of a strategy. Strategic questioning is one that I haven't used a lot, but I'm seeing it more and more in the research literature. And that idea of asking sort of journalistic questions, being strategic in your thinking. How does this work? Why does it work this way? Quick writing, interviews and dialogues. I think interviews and dialogues, especially if you want students to learn about something from an authoritative source, to be able to allow students to go out and interview or to have a dialogue with someone in the professional arena. That can be a very informative can be an informative experience, can provide informative set of data for the learner to share with the class that the class doesn't know about. So one of the things that I have seen recently in my daughter's high school, they needed to go out and observe or talk to a professional in their future career and find out about their future career. So she wants to go into archaeology. And so she set up an interview to go talk to some people. And immediately she had some excellent data to talk about, well, is this a really good career for me or not? Am I happy with this? Number 9 is free writing. And it's different from a quick write because free writes it doesn't necessarily have a time limit on it. It's just kind of stream of consciousness, whereas quick writing, you're putting down longer ideas than jotting, but in a rapid succession. So these are some of the pre-writing strategies. Let's go more into the ones I mentioned earlier that were a little bit oddly named. So pre-writing strategy number 1, all about. And the description of this one is the writers write everything they know about a topic. They aren't guided to, they're guided to self-question, to look up what they don't know. But the idea is that they get everything down in their brains as quickly as possible. You could use a KWL chart for this. So the process is write for about 2 minutes. Reread their writing. Think, pair, and share about something surprising about the list. If things are wrong, explain that sometimes we need to think we know something, but when we read more and we do more research, we realize that maybe we misunderstood something. So when they're seeing it from a distance and seeing the idea away from what's all going on in their heads, they're more likely to be able to see that, oh, I thought I knew this, but I guess I didn't. Number 5 is you reread your list again and you think about that list. And that's where you want to get into self-questioning, asking students to take notes on it. Where do they need to look up more? What don't I know? What am I unsure is true? And then we want to model those lists. Before we ask them to do anything, we'll always model how we would go about doing it. We want to make sure that as we're doing this strategy, we have put a check mark on the side of the things that have been double checked and that the writer is sure is accurate. And then finally, put a question mark on the side of things that our author is unsure about. So that's the first pre-writing strategy to share with you today. The second one is better questions. And I really like this visual here. I like to have visuals in everything I do, but this visual makes me really happy because students can see the different kinds of STEM sentences they can ask themselves. So then they can say, oh, I want to understand better the relationship between 2 things. So these are some of the questions I can ask my own list. Okay. So this is a very good resource for us in terms of asking better questions. This strategy is about avoiding giving students research questions or a format and to teach them to generate their own questions to research and write about. So this is a little hard, right? Not giving them any sort of format, it's a little scary. But once you've already worked through several rounds of different writing processes, writing, genres maybe that you've been working on them with, this sort of things becomes a little easier to do and more second nature. So this isn't a strategy I'd use right away within the school year. The process is that the students are write all about from the previous one for a peer, as the peer audience. And the peer writes down questions on a sticky note and gives it to the speaker. The speaker writes the questions into their notebook and then adds questions to the list to spark their own thinking. And then they switch roles so they can help prompt each other to dig deeper. The next strategy 3, is to take notes. And we all know that students should be taking notes. We all know that that taking notes is going to reinforce their understanding of things, make things more comprehensible to them, longer retention, everything. But this taking note strategy is really avoiding that copying from a resource and avoiding the plagiarism, which is so difficult for all of us to try to get students who are unsure with their writing and their own thinking to move away from an authoritative source, right? So we ask students to read and take notes with the resource closed. So they've read, but now the source is closed, it's right there across the table, and then they have to start, what was that about, and reflecting on what was it about. Personally, I like to do this where I might read aloud a passage, a mentor text first. I might walk them through the different aspects of the mentor text, and then I might ask them to read it silently and then close the book, and then use Cornell note-taking method to identify the main ideas and when they're reading. For anyone who hasn't seen the Cornell note-taking method, it has a couple columns. On the far left-hand column, main ideas. And then across from that, in the middle column, or the right column, all the details. And you just draw a line for every kind of different new point. And the bottom is a summary. And the summary, based on the research I've been doing with literacy in the last couple of years, that summary is the most important part. And it's the part that students skip the most. So they're like, oh, but I just wrote it up here. Well, the words are different. So we have to get them to understand that the summary is putting it all together in one nice, neat package. So then I would teach them to read for the main ideas and model it again. So I would be doing these kinds of things simultaneously. Then I'd ask them to read a short introductory paragraph with a peer, and as a whole class review their notes to make sure they're on the right track. And that's where we could put the check marks next to the things like, yes, this is a good fact for me to use. So these pre-writing strategies work together in a very lovely way. Sifting through the text is the fourth pre-writing strategy. And I love this because it makes things very concrete for learners. So it ensures that students see the relationship between information, the main ideas, the details, and the interesting facts. Then the students are encouraged to put the main ideas in boxes and details in bullet points. So as they're reading the passage, they would just put a box around what they think is the main idea. And then next to it, they just put a little bullet point. Next to other ones, they put a little bullet point. This is one of the details. So you can see here on grown to be sold about bananas and other cash crops. The main idea is in the square, some natural resources are sold in Africa. That's the main idea. And then the bullet points are called cash crops, grown on small farms. Large companies grow cash crops on plantations. That's one of the farm names. So they can identify, oh, okay, so here's the main idea, and it helps them break it apart, because we all know that when our multilingual learners are looking through text, they often give equal kind of weight to everything they're reading. So this is something that's very helpful for them to weight things as detail versus main idea. They can read a passage once all the way through. And again, it might be where you start with a teacher read aloud, then they read it, you check comprehension, you make sure that they understand it. And this is, again, using a little bit an easy passage. and then read again to put a bigger point or a box around the main ideas. And then the third time for putting the bullet points in. So by the end of a reading, they'll have read it several times, you'll have discussed it, and you'll have the students will have identified what they think the main ideas and the details are. Then once you've modeled this, they should be able to go to another passage for any research that they're going to do on their topic and use the same strategy. You might have to do it many times, so. Strategy 5 is words their way. And the description is demonstrate through using two paragraphs on the same topic that that specify information and details. That specific information and details do matter. So guide students to identify through questioning which paragraph shows the writer knows more about a topic. So basically you have two different ones, and you read them aloud, you talk about them, you talk about the parts of them, analyzing the mentor text and the texts, and then ask them to look at those texts and which ones are better, which paragraph is better in terms of a good topic sentence, which one is better in its introductory, that hook, right? Which one is better in putting in those details and making connections between sentences? Which one is better in terms of the language that the author used? For example, did they use really interesting nouns or verbs or adjectives, right? So then you're kind of channeling their attention to these different angles to show them and illustrate what is good writing. How am I doing on time? Am I doing okay?
Yeah. How long do you think you're going to take?
Just another minute or two.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
This is amazing. I could have you go on forever because, it's writing. But I know Maria has all dressed up. Look at her beautiful hair. So she's waiting.
Okay. Well, let me finish up here, and then I'll turn the mic over to you, Maria. So this is asking the expert. And you encourage students to ask the text and others about the topic. And it's not something we normally do, right? We don't say to ourselves, hello, text, tell me what you're about. I mean, I know it's silly, but on some levels, that's what we're doing in our brains, is we're doing a lot of that questioning. And in order for students to see how they should be questioning a text and how they should be looking at the structure, we can teach them to do that, and to really set up good questions within a reading, whether a fiction reading or a nonfiction reading. So the expert can be anybody, a peer, a caregiver, a local expert at a local museum or a library, and then they can create journalistic types of questions in advance to bring to their discussions with these individuals. After that, they can, during the interview, they take notes, and then they can go through, verify their information, and then use clustering to organize the ideas into some sort of organized flow for the essay. This is one of my favorites, I have to admit. It's called Ready, Set, Action. And we have so many resources for this now. One of my favorite things to do, because I live in the middle of nowhere. there is like one museum in town, and it's a cowboy museum. I'm like, oh boy. So it's not even an art museum or something. So I feel a little bit sometimes like out of it here. But what I do have is the internet. And there are so many virtual field trips. So one of my favorite things to do with young ones is to take them on a zoo tour of the San Diego Zoo, and they have live cams any day, any time of what the animals are doing. And they've got videos on like koalas hanging out at the trees with their babies. So cute, right? So what better to have the children actually looking and observing and understanding what they're seeing and putting that on paper. That's real. That is real stuff. So there's tons of it. You can take them on a tour of the Louvre. You can take them all over the place. You can take them to the top of Machu Picchu. Tons of different places that you can visit with them. And you would want to have them choose an animal, or in this case, I chose animal because I was using the zoo as an example, to observe and find and to find one in the field trip. So I'd take them to the website and say, what kind of animals are there? Which ones would you want to observe? And then I would give them class time to do this, using a graphic organizer to help them organize their thoughts. So what animal, where do they live? What climate? Well, koalas, they apparently really like hanging out in trees. They're not ground dwellers like squirrels, right? So nodding back to the squirrel discussion earlier. How do they find a mate? How do they have babies? What are other interesting details about this animal? Is it venomous? Is it a mammal that lives in the sea? So creating those kinds of questions for them, with them, to find out about their animal, and then having them an opportunity to observe and find out what they can, and then use other resources. Okay, I think this might be the last one. Stick it or flick it. This is when they're starting to feel overwhelmed with all of the information that they're finding, right? So you encourage the writers to revisit their, to read the readings and look at different sources. And on each different sticky note, you would write a topic or statement or something. If you're very concerned about the source, that's maybe where they would write their source in as well, right? So they put all their sticky notes out on the table, and they can move them around to cluster similar items. And then if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't work, if they can't figure out where to put it in, they can put it to the side and reorganize. And they have all the extras if they want to go to that later on when it comes to them. Oh, I think I can put this in. They don't really lose any information, but the idea is, okay, you got to keep it or lose it. But they won't really probably lose it. They'll just move it to the side. So those are my instructional strategies that I've been teaching my students recently to use, because I think they delve into that beginning, making it less challenging. And so they're in for the long road, and then they can enjoy their writing a lot more, because when we have the plan, it's relatively easy. So it can be done. I don't know if we've got any time for questions. I'll turn to our...
We've got time. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any one thing you would like to take from this presentation, remember from this presentation, or a concept that resonated with you? I notice Gulruk mentioned it's very informative. Just my curiosity, do you present or prefer to present orally or through written communication? I just think they're different. I don't have a preference. I think there are times I really just want to be with somebody in person, right? And I don't want to have to go through a medium of written word. But there are other times where that writing becomes then permanent. And I like the permanency of being able to put your thoughts down on paper. I'm a notoriously bad person for note taking. I have notes all over my house in piles on white pads. Because obviously I value it. But yeah, that's just kind of me. I don't know if y'all feel the same way. There was one up here. I thought I saw one. Right, Miriam. Yes, the ChatGPT. I would have them write dialogues or whatever you wanted them to show them as a model. That we don't have to spend our time to write it ourselves. We can get a decent exemplar. We can analyze it, and then they know, oh, the teacher knows about this. And we're more likely to get real things. We also have to share with them too that ChatGPT does lie. So I think this is one of the funniest conversations I hear with my husband and his students who are learning to write at university. And he's like, they lie. They're going to get you into trouble. They're like your bad friend. You know? Okay, well, they always said in graduate school, if you get to the end of a presentation, people have lots of questions for you, then you've done a good presentation, but nobody's asking any questions. So I will just thank you. I pulled some of my ideas from Buckner, but I also have some of my ideas in my book. This is one I couldn't show you earlier, and this is just an introduction to Tesol. And I hope that you use some of these or one or two of these to put together a proposal for TESOL for next year in Tampa.
We did have one question in the chat. It was, do you find students skip some of the steps just to go straight to the end result?
Yes. Isn't that the challenge? It's always the student group who you put together with a complex task and you say, do each of the steps in order. And instead of them talking about the steps, they give steps to each other. And so they're not doing them in any kind of order, and it just kind of throws things together. That I guess is the way of students is we have to explain the purpose of doing it. And if they have a purpose, this is how it's going to help you. It will help you organize. It will help you confirm that your information is accurate. I think if they understand the purpose for it, they're less likely to skip it. And if you tell them, I'm specifically looking to make sure that you have all your parts here, to make sure you've done it accurately and thoroughly, then I think they're less inclined to do that. But yeah, they want it to be done as quickly as possible. Yeah.
We also have Dr. Maureen Milad has raised her hand.
Oh, hello.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Kate, for this presentation. Of course, academic writing is one of the courses I chair and teach as well. And it's amazing, all the sticky notes and the ideas, I loved it. My question is related to ChatGPT, because, this is the topic of the this month, let's say.
Right.
The artificial intelligence is obsessing us all. I have a problem with my students' assignments, especially at the university level. I feel that they are using it, and of course, sometimes Turnitin cannot detect it, unfortunately, because now there are other programs in artificial intelligence that can help you to paraphrase ChatGPT and avoid plagiarism. So the problem is making me thinking that we're going to depend on paper and pencil in class assessment. We're not gonna trust any assignment posted on LMS or submitted via LMS or Teams. Do you agree, or do you have any idea how can we fight it? Although I agree with you that sometimes ChatGPT is not providing accurate results and no citation, and you're totally 100% correct in that. And by the way, my son was having a presentation at Toastmaster to prove that artificial intelligence is not beneficial and all of these debate points. So he asked ChatGPT 2 + 2 equals, so ChatGPT answered 4. So he said, no, 2 + 2 = 5. And he started arguing with the ChatGPT, convincing it. So next time, or after a few minutes, he came back and asked ChatGPT 2 + 2, the ChatGPT gave it 5. So this is totally unreliable, and we have to tell our students to beware.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of people are going to handwritten in class. And if you're requiring all the stages of the pre-writing and you're walking them through it and you're giving them class time to do it, you're more likely to get something real from the students. But I will constantly go back to the statement that Brisk said, which was, make sure that you're teaching them how to write and not teaching them, not throwing them in the deep end, not, just saying, now write. That we're actually helping them and scaffolding them into that writing. And if we're doing that in class, we're going to be more likely to have something authentic. I doubt they're going to go home and get one typed up on ChatGPT and try to bring it into the classroom. But it's happening everywhere. So I think what's the expression? The cat's out of the box or something. So genie's out of the bottle. So yeah. I think we're all going to be dealing with that. So I am just
thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so glad that y'all invited me to come and talk. And I will sit around in the next session for a few if anybody wants to chat on the text box. But I had a surgery last Wednesday, so I'm like a little run down today. I'm not my most chipper self. So I hope you'll forgive me. I'm apologizing for not being more energetic. Anyway, thanks again. Oh, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This
Thank you
was
very
super,
much.
super useful. Wonderful reminders, wonderful techniques.